Hello everybody, welcome to this Monday evening episode of working on the Tomcat. So rudder molds, here we go. You see one's gray and one's black. I ran out of the primer last night and I picked up another can, and apparently somebody put the wrong color cap on the can of primer, so I'm gonna have one oddball rudder. Yeah, it's a prototype. What can you say? As far as the stuff that I'm using compared to the stuff I use on the Horton, this is the stuff I use on the Horton. You can see it's kind of got like these the hexagons in it. Those hexagons are there's some sort of fiber that does not soak up resin, but all of the gaps you see between those hexagons stays full of resin. And that's why this stuff is extremely heavy, is because all those gaps just stay full of resin. And it works out to be about, I think it's like 2 kilograms per square meter or something that of resin that this stuff holds, or per cubic meter. So I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it does. I mean, this little stuff, if I were to do the entire F-14 fuselage in it, there would be 16 pounds of epoxy in the fuselage skins. Just epoxy, not including the weight of this stuff, the fiberglass, carbon fiber. That's just epoxy in this, not including the epoxy in the rest of the fabrics and everything in there. So you can see the fuselage in the F-14 would get extremely heavy with this stuff. But because the Horton's just so, well, it's not really small, but it's kind of compact, you don't have to, I wasn't quite as worried about it. I mean, even the Horton fuselage with this stuff only came out to 6 pounds with all the internal structure and everything. The reason why I chose this for the Horton is because you can watch as I pull it, how the openings in the hexagons kind of open up a little bit. The camera doesn't focus too well. But this stuff is extremely conformable. I mean, you can see that's wrapped around my thumb, and it's nice and smooth, where it'll conform over some really surprising and tight curves. And that's the reason why we chose it for the Horton. We were willing to sacrifice the little bit of extra weight in exchange for saving us tons of time doing the layups. The Horton, it takes about a week for one person to lay up, to do all the dry layups inside the molds, and it takes basically another week to infuse it and assemble it with all the internal parts and everything. But if we had to cut these little foam layers like what I'm doing for the F-14 and like Bob does for the Thunder Chief, it'd probably take you a week just to cut all the pieces of foam, because there's just so many curves to the airplane. You'd be constantly cutting all these awkward shapes and having to put them in there, and then trying to do the layup by hand and then vacuum bag it. It's just a lot of time that we didn't really want to have to mess with. And the infusion on the Horton was supposed to be it was the test for the F-14, because I was really hoping I could infuse the F-14 fuselage just because of its size. But the one thing I learned about the Horton is that this stuff works out being really heavy. Infusion is awesome on small, somewhat complex parts, but on something like the F-14, you're going to have multiple resin entry points. I mean, even on the Horton, if you didn't watch the videos, there's 3 resin entry points in just that thing, and that's only 3 foot wide. And the F-14 fuselage is a little over 4 foot wide, not including all the valleys and everything. So I mean, you probably have half a dozen, 6 to 9 entry points just for the resin, and it'd be a nightmare. It's just easier to break the fuselage down into the 4 sections. Just lay up the 4 sections by themselves and then join it together. You're gonna have seam lines, but since the airplane's not painted in the mold, you can do some body work to work that out. So you saw the Aeromat, as it's called in the States. That's what it's sold under, but it's the manufacturer is called Sorg, and they got a lot of different stuff. That's 2mm thick stuff. This is what is going in the F-14. This is what I use in the rudder. I mean, you can see this stuff is paper thin. It's only, well, nominally it should be 1mm, and I think this stuff works out to be about 0.9mm, so it's a little a little less than that. But again, this stuff, since it's so thin, it conforms fairly well. All the little holes you see mostly fill up with resin, but the actual bubbles in here do not, because they're sealed up. So the bubbles are hollow, and it's just in between the bubbles that fills up. But again, there's not a lot of space in a piece of 1mm foam for resin to kind of soak up and stay. So that's what I'm using on the F-14. I started to do some kind of messing around with a couple of those. I had 2 uncut sheets of that stuff that are about 14 inches by 30 inches. And just for the fuselage, it takes 20 of those sheets of foam. And when you look at one sheet of foam is 50 bucks, you can understand very quickly why these things cost as much as they do. And again, that's $50 if I were to buy it from the US. If I get it from Germany, it's a little less than 50, and it works out. Overall, it works out there's about $1,000 worth of foam in one airframe, not including all the bulkheads and everything. So if you ever wondered why composite ARF costs as much as it does, that's one of the reasons. So, like I said, okay. Anyway, back to the rudder. You want to see some layups? I guess I'll do a layup. I got both halves of the rudders are ready for done, are ready to be laid up. Let me zoom back out here. You can see I've got rudder mold laid out, primed. Got my 2 layers of glass here, the foam, peel ply, which is just off camera. And then a little bit further down there, I've got my breather material, perforated plastic, and the vacuum bag tube and the seal. And my vacuum pumps over there already sucked down to 25 inches of vacuum. So we're just about ready to go. Let me go put some hardener in the resin, and we'll be ready to do some work. One thing I'm doing as I'm laying up all these parts, I'm actually taking notes on how much resin I use. That way I can get down and know exactly how much every time I lay up a part, how much resin to mix up so I don't waste any. And been a little, I guess you call it OCD with it, but make life a lot easier when it's time to order more materials in order to start manufacturing these things. I did finally get the fuselage mold. They're primed up. I bolted all the mold sections back together just because it's probably going to be end of the month, middle of July, before I even get a chance to order the Arex foam and everything for it. So it'll be end of July, beginning of August at the earliest before I get to lay up the fuselage. Unless, of course, someone comes up here and offers to buy something I've got for the price I want for it, and then it might be a little bit sooner. If anybody's interested in buying a set of landing gear for a Don Smith Dornier 335, I've got a brand new set from Sierra Giant Scale. I bought them back I bought them in February this year. It's kind of an impulse buy, and now I kind of regret it. But if you're interested in that project, I got the gear and the plans. I'll throw the plans in for free if you pay for the gear. They're not cheap. I was astonished by the price of it. Like I said, it's kind of an impulse buy, and now I wish I hadn't done it. They would have more than paid for the foam for the F-14. So, almost done mixing up this epoxy, and we'll get to work here. thing I like to do with these small parts that are kind of laboring involved is put a coat of resin in here at first on both mold halves. That way you don't have to worry about this stuff starting to exotherm on you and start kicking off before the estimated pop life comes up. Bob, if you're wondering, this mold is prepped with that free coat stuff, and it took me exactly a minute and a half to prep it for primer after I pulled that first rudder out of it. It took me another minute and a half to spray primer on it. So I know you're kind of a little apprehensive about trying something new, but you got to try this stuff. Even if you're just making up a new little mold that you want to try it on, something small, give it a shot, man. It's definitely worth it. I think once you try it once or twice, you'll be hooked like I am, and you'll never want to see that wax and PVA again. Alright, got all that done. So I'm going to grab my first layer of glass here. And I have this size to where it slightly overhangs on the top and the bottom and the leading edge. And then it just overhangs onto the flange of the mold. And I'll show you guys tomorrow when I pop this thing out of the bag how I go about trimming it. It's a little bit easier than trying to cut it to fit exactly in there and then kind of not fitting like you wanted it to. That's the preferred way, but if you're careful and you do it my way, it works too. Some people kind of look at it and shudder, but it involves a chisel, but no hammer. Again, you notice I didn't put any epoxy spooge or anything in the corners. And I'll show you guys why here in a moment. Zoom in so you guys get a better look. Whoops. There we go. So you see that one's got epoxy first layer of glass in there. So now I got that one done. The other one. I'll do the exact same thing with this one. On the first rudder mold, I kind of let the trailing edge of the fiberglass overlap onto the flange as well. I've got a couple of little air bubbles there along the back where the glass doesn't go completely down in the corner. So this one I'm going to make sure that it doesn't quite, that it's kind of flush up against the ridge of the trailing edge and not going up the back side of it. That way I don't need to put air bubbles. bottom part's a little tricky because it's got that big bulge in it for the, I think it's actual rudder actuator on the roller point. So down here is really kind of a pain in the butt to do. So you just kind of got to fiddle around with it. And the sandwich material down here is actually two different pieces. One nice thing about this black primer is you can actually see where if the fiberglass has a bubble in it, or if it's not quite in a corner, or if it's lifted up from the bulge in this case. You kind of got to mess with it a little bit. A little bit of epoxy goo that you make up with. I think it's a little bit easier, but the first rudder I did turned out so good, I'm going to try and do this one the same way. Alright, there's that one. What I'm going to do is on this one, you can kind of see how it's got a pretty good layer of resin on it and pulled up. I'm going to put just a little bit more resin down here in the middle. What this will do is it will help that foam stick without shifting around on you. You just gotta be extremely careful you don't make that layer of glass shift on there. And there's a foam piece here. And again, it gets lined up with the trailing edge. And this one is cut to fit just perfect, so you actually have to bend it up in the middle so I can get it down there in that corner at the bottom without moving the glass. Take the brush and just use it to push it down. That's why I put that little bit extra resin down in the center of the part. That way, if you get up close, you can see kind of the change in colors of the resin, how it's dark in the center and kind of white on around the edges. So you know you got a good amount of epoxy on there to hold this thing in. Put a coat of epoxy onto the foam for now. That way it can kind of soak in a bit. And I just slather this stuff on there. That way, when you put that glass layer on, it really sticks down really well. And then when you stick it in the vacuum bag and suck it down in the vacuum, it'll suck this excess resin out. Better to have slightly too much epoxy and it be a little heavier than not quite enough and delaminate on you if you fail. That's what my composite guy at school always said. It's like Mom was saying, there's a fine balance between too heavy and not, and too weak and too strong and not light enough. Alright, so there's that. Now what I've got on each end of this thing, I've got a little thicker piece. You can see it's shaped to the airfoil of it, both of them. And these just get stuck down in there as well. because of these little pieces, that's why I didn't put any glue in the corner. These things force that first layer that I just put down, forces that one into the corner of the mold. That way you get a really nice crisp corner. You know, put those in there. Put some epoxy on them. That way they can start kind of soaking that up. On to the next one. Notice I keep switching back and forth on these small parts. I do that just to keep that epoxy from exotherming on us, so stay good a little longer. You notice this one's cut a little bit different on the bottom. It doesn't go all the way down. I'll show you why here in a moment. But it goes inside this mold just like the other one. Curling edge of the tip goes in the corner. Nice thing about this stuff, because it's so thin, you can just put it right in the mold when it's dry, and you can just kind of trace around and mark your 4 corners, and it works out really well for making your own templates as well. Bends around that corner really nicely. There's no having to heat it up or anything. And now I got another little piece. There we go. This one goes down there in that bulge. This was kind of a pain to deal with, but it works. This one I didn't paint any extra resin in there because I didn't really need it. It was pretty wet as it was. Alright, so now you can see I got both of those pieces in there. That's a little bit better for you. And then this piece goes right up in here as well. And again, no glue in the corners. This piece will actually force it down in there. And you'll see it kind of sticks up a little proud at the surface. I'll show you how I do that tomorrow. Take some more epoxy on here. So I'll put that tip piece of foam in. Alright, back to number 1. And you can see there's a nice coat of epoxy on that whole piece of foam. want to make sure the glass on the back's trying to get back here nice and fully wetted out. Alright, there's that one. It's got all its goodies in it. There's some fuel ply down. And you kind of probably notice I'm not really too concerned about up here at the leading edge where it's not quite forced down all the way. The vacuum will take care of that. As long as everything else is positioned really low where it won't shift on you. Put the vacuum on it slow, you can make sure it doesn't, that foam goes exactly where you want it. When I put this fuel ply down, I'm making sure that I get it down in the corners really well. You can kind of tell how good of a layup you do when you put the fuel ply down, because if you put way too much resin, you'll have a puddle of it on top of the fuel ply, but if you didn't put enough, you'll have a dry spot. So here you can see it's little puddles here and there, but overall it's pretty good. And once you put the vacuum to it, it'll suck even more resin out. Alright, so that's that one. Now we come down to the last one. This one's a little more difficult by that bulge. Always makes things a little fun. Hear the music, if you don't like it, feel free to make requests. Not guaranteed I'll play it, but we'll see. I have a very eclectic music, taste of music, so I listen to just about anything. Like I said, if you have a request, feel free. And if you got a Slacker radio channel you prefer to hear, or Pandora or whatever, even better. There's that one. If you're wondering how much epoxy I have left. Pretty much done. It's empty. Little to no waste. I like everything to be muddy. While this bulge, you have to be really careful, especially here in the corner where that extra fiberglass kind of hangs out. It always wants to pull the fiberglass away from the core material. That's why I use the tip of the brush down here. That point works really well for exactly where you want it. Alright. There's that one. Next thing to go on is our perforated release plastic. This just kind of keeps the vacuum from sucking too much resin out. I had that issue on the very first set of horizontal stab skins I did. That pump of mine put so much vacuum it was actually sucking all the resin out of the layer of glass that's closest, that's furthest away from the mold surface. So it got really light parts. The problem is every time you bend it, you'd see the skins eliminate. Which I've still got that as a kind of a learning thing. Don't do that stupid. Type of tool. And then breather cloth. This is actually just some cheap, it's like, it's quilt padding, I think. It's just polyester, I think it's polyfill. You get it at Michael's or even Walmart has it. This stuff's cheap. It's like a couple of bucks for a big roll of it. And that roll's enough to do, well, 2 vertical fins, 2 rudders so far. And you still have stuff left over. Vacuum bag. This is actually a tube. You can see it's joined on each end and then the end of it down there. That's just a cheap latex caulk. Like literally the cheapest tube you can get up. I pay like $1.50 for that tube. To seal the end of it. So there's some money saving tips for you. In the perforated plastic, the easiest way to make that and get uniform holes in it is take I think it's a top flight woodpecker that you would use for monocoating an airplane. Break off about every other poker on it, on all the wheels, and then take some clear plastic from just like painter's drop cloth. You just fold it up a bunch of times and run that woodpecker across the plastic. And next thing you know, you got evenly spaced. Well, as evenly spaced as you can get by just running a wheel back and forth. Perforated plastic that won't stick. And doing that way, I think the little woodpecker tool is like $20. And then the plastic drop cloth, I mean, it's literally like $5 for 100 square feet. Stupid cheap. It saved you money. I think I remember how I had these things in here to fit both of them. Like I said, you can also use that plastic drop cloth as a vacuum bag as well. Again, you can use that latex caulk to seal it around the whole thing. And as long as you don't put a hole in it, you can just reuse it as much as you want, really. Alright. There's that. Put that over there. You see my vacuum fitting's not on the part. So to make sure that you get your vacuum to go across to both parts. You see I got my breather film, the breather material overlapping each other. I'm going to take another piece of breather material I'm going to put under the vacuum tube fitting. And then my bag clip comes out to seal the other end. I think I've used this bag probably at least a dozen times for random parts. Since we're not making real airplanes, there's no reason to throw this stuff away after one use if it'll still hold a vacuum or not leak excessively. Well, I'm sure it's probably 20 minutes worth of video, but hopefully it's worth it for you guys. Alright. I'll show you guys my monstrosity of a vacuum system if I haven't already. The big old black tank you see right there is my vacuum pump setup. I got the pump is actually here. And I got a gauge that you probably can't see because it's off the screen. So I readjust that. Anyway, I got the pump here and the gauge. I got a little box, electrical box here. It's got a bunch of control stuff in it, relay and whatnot. And there's also a vacuum gauge in there. You plug this thing up. You notice it doesn't come on when you plug it up. The reason why is because it's set up to where it automatically cycles this pump whenever the vacuum gets to a low point, and it turns the pump on until it gets to whatever preset vacuum setting you want, and then it automatically shuts off. So you'll see when I open this valve. Let me put the camera back on the parts over here. Let me zoom in. Oh wait, I've still got to figure out which way to zoom in and out on this thing, because I suck at that. All right, here we go. Put that on there. Reach halfway across the yard. Just barely crack it open. We'll start sucking the vacuum. You see it already, and then it automatically comes on its own. little dots showing up. So there's your an F-14 rotor mold layup. If you want to see more of these videos, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just show you guys the aftermath. But until next time, y'all have a good Monday night, and we'll see you back in the shop.